And if you see someone doing something like that you think is great, then you have a choice to retreat or to walk towards that, be in their atmosphere, try and see what they're doing that you want to do, and understand that you absolutely can do it yourself.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven, professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Kristeen is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Kristeen and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors.
Beautiful. Okay, hello everybody. How are you guys all doing today? So in this episode, we are going to talk about comparison. The title of this episode is Comparison Almost Stole Our Friendship Because It Did. And this is, hopefully, for me, it's the biggest motivation for me to never, ever, ever fall for the comparison trap ever again in my life, because if I had, I would have missed out on the most amazing friendship I've ever had in so many aspects of my life. And I think that when you can get past this really challenging human phenomenon of comparing and then all of the reactions that we have to it, which for me has commonly been, you know, if I'm feeling capable, I'll try and compete. Or if I'm feeling more defeated or overwhelmed, I will just, you know, go and hide in a corner and pretend that I didn't see this thing that I'm comparing myself to. But when we can master the way that we respond to comparison, as opposed to planning to get rid of this very human behavior of comparing ourselves, then you can open up so many amazing opportunities, and probably the exact opportunities that are going to make you the most happy, which is why our friendship is such a great example of this, what's on the other side of responding differently to your comparison. So for those of you guys in medicine, you know that medicine is a strongly hierarchical system. And with this hierarchy, for me, I've always felt the biggest gap was, you know, I think the interns and the residents, like, buddy up, residents and the registrars and the interns, you're really like a team. You're all very relatable. I think you're on the ground a lot together. And then the gap in my mind between a registrar and consultant is inconceivable. They're just on another level to me. And I don't know if that's because I am at the registrar level and so I'm biased and I put them up on a pedestal. But that is the way that I have thought about the relationships that we have in the hospital in the first part of my career, that consultants weren't even relatable to me in any way. And I mean, that was also probably because I started very young. I was a doctor when I was 22. So I was in there very early, and a lot of the consultants were also a lot older than me. And I'd often been quite insecure about my age. I was somebody who wanted to grow up very quickly, as quick as possible. So, you know, my 30s can't come soon enough because then I will magically feel worthy, right? When I'm old enough. But all of this to say, this gap between me as a registrar and Kristeen over here being a consultant almost meant that our friendship didn't happen. And that's because I had bought into this idea that Kristeen was somehow on another level to me, on which level she would never ever want to talk to me, associate with me, let alone work with me, let alone be a friend of mine. And this is the danger of comparison, because as it turns out, none of that was true. Tell me your side of the story. Tell me what was happening in your internal world over there.
Yes, because this is what's so funny, right? Is because you were thinking that, which I mean, it's so distant past for us now that it's a really funny story now. But it was very real at the time. And so you were having that experience, whilst over here, I was having this experience where you had kind of reached out to me. I think it was Instagram, and you sort of made yourself known to me. And you were just really connecting. You were just reaching out, and I think you had come to one of my tutorials or something, and you were just being really supportive and just so beautiful, like an absolute cheerleader. But on your Instagram, you were showing up in a way that at that time I felt incapable of, right? So I was trying to start this online platform, but I had major authenticity issues. I had major issues with being seen. And you, on the other hand, were showing up in this way that was very much, this is who I am, here's me. And you were just so confident. The content was just flowing right out of you. You were doing all these, to me, incredible social media acrobatics and just being who you were. And to me, that felt really unachievable at the time. And I remember just being so, I thought this person is so cool. What a lovely person. And I really admire them. But also, every time you came up on my feed, I would be reminded of this inner kind of battle I was having with myself, where I was scared to show up like you were doing. And it was making me feel bad about myself. So I unfollowed you, Becc. It was the only solution I could think of at the time. I unfollowed you, and I mean, it's hilarious now, but I unfollowed you mainly because I couldn't deal with the pangs of, I wouldn't say it was even jealousy at that time. It was more like just like it was an awe. It was like a we're different. She's so different. She's obviously who I want to be, like, but we're so different. And I found it quite hard to relate to you because I was having that inner battle with myself. So it's so funny that you say that you were putting me on this pedestal because I was putting you in this other pedestal. I unfollowed you. And then I can't remember how we built that bridge. I'm pretty sure you rebuilt the bridge by reaching out, and then I sort of got over myself and realized, like, Kristeen, you're being ridiculous, like, just for starts. And then we caught up in real life, I think, and we went for like a coffee and a walk, and it was just one of those, like, we just talked for hours and hours and hours. And it's always the same when I see you even now, like, when we connect, whether it's online or in person, we're always like, it's like all these ideas come and it's so expansive, and we're both trying to achieve these goals of our own. And so to have someone who's going through a similar process is actually one of the most beautiful things to help you become who you want to be. But at the time, I didn't realize that. And now what I would say is that the best thing that ever happened was getting over that comparison, because I mean, even just being around you right now, I know that being around you changes me. Like, do you know there's that saying, like, the 5 people that you hang around with, you are the average of the 5 people you hang around with the most, or something? I believe that's true. And I hang around you an awful lot. And I'm so grateful for it. And I can't really put into words the amount of enhancements that have come to me just by being your friend and your business partner now, and all the things. It's just been so beautiful. But the reason we want to talk about this today is because it's so easy to be in that situation where you are comparing yourself to someone else. And I feel like when that happens, you get to this crossroad where you'll show up in a few different ways. So some of the examples we've talked about already is you might compete, like Becc was saying. If you're feeling game, you might try and sort of overcome the comparison by showing them who's who and what's what. So you might compete. You might actually retreat, which is what I did. I unfollowed Becc because I couldn't deal with it, and I wanted to I wanted to not see my own internal struggle anymore. So I retreated. But I think there's another way, which is where we've arrived at, which is that collaboration. And we want to talk about that fork in the road moment when you realize you're comparing yourself in some level and the choices that can be made and how it can enhance your life.
And this is just a brilliant example, isn't it? The way that we respond to comparing that Kristeen's just spelled out for us. You have this natural, human, so automatic response of comparing yourself. This is actually how the human mind works. It doesn't work in calculating absolute terms of anything. It gets a feel for the situation, the environment based on relativities. Your mind just works in relativities, not in absolute numbers or particulars. It's always measuring and titrating the environment around itself. Just like in the same way, I could be outside, and because it's winter, I'm used to the freezing cold. So I go out, on a morning in winter, it's pretty cold in my house. I step outside, it's a little bit colder out the door versus in the house. And I notice a little bit of a change of cold, but it is now summer. If I felt that amount of coldness in my life in the next minute, I would be shocked. I would be like, oh my goodness, I'm not okay. I can't cope with this temperature. This is the worst temperature I've ever felt. I never want to feel this temperature again, right? But instead, our body, our minds, our nervous systems work in relativities. It's not that cold because compared to the last moment of cold, it's not that different. But to go from me now being warm to really cold, that's shocking. So this is just how our mind works. If anybody tells you that you can stop comparing yourself to other people, that is nonsense. That's not how your brain will ever let you operate in the world. And I hope that you can't ever make your brain do that, because it will be a disaster for you being able to cope in your day-to-day life. So instead, as Kristeen's saying, we've come up with this concept together of these different responses you can choose to take when you notice yourself comparing. Some of them are very unproductive. Some of them are hyperproductive. The hyperproductive one, and this is really what we want you guys to settle on right now, this friendship that I could just talk about for days and days. How people say like 1 + 1 = 3, two minds make a third. I feel like 1 + 1 = 127 here. Like, that's the kind of benefit I get from having Kristeen in my life. And if we responded to comparison in a different way, say retreating, as Kristeen said, that's my natural response to retreat. And I can actually see myself doing this somewhere in my life right now. And I've actually got a plan for myself to instead reach out and collaborate instead. I'm not a bad person because my natural response to my comparison wasn't productive. I'm just recognizing that now, and I'm redirecting to the person I want to be, and I'm going to actively collaborate instead. But when you can, if we had both taken those responses of retreating consistently, and we never together decided to turn the corner there, we would have missed out on this. And we want you guys to look at where in your life it's possible you're doing this to yourself as well. It's possible your response to the comparisons that your mind offers you are actually stealing a lot from you. Because when you are comparing yourself to somebody else, it's very possible that there's something amazing that you see in them that you want to move closer towards in your life, that you want to become more of. As Kristeen was saying, it's the 5 people that you spend most time with you become like. It's very possible that you actually really have something to gain from them. You really admire them for something. You want to be more like them. And if instead of retreating or trying to defeat them, make them less, you move over to this space where you either compete, and you try and lift yourself up to be at their standard that you see them at. You're like, I love that standard, I want to be there. Or, I think this is the best one, I know Kristeen will agree, collaborate.
Yeah. And I love what you said there because I was just having the exact same thought with just a slightly different spin. Is when you said, like, you're probably feeling that way because you want to move closer to them. There's something about them that's magnetizing you because you probably have a knowing that it's you kind of want to be something similar to them on some level. There's something that you really want to be, and you don't feel like you have it for whatever reason. When you actually choose to retreat, and it is a choice, that's what we're telling you, it is a choice. When you choose to retreat, what kind of happens there is that you kind of affirm to yourself that that's the truth, right? That you are less than in some way, that they have something you don't, that you'll never have, and you've retreated, and you're in your own little bubble of, like, I guess, negativity in some ways, that you're putting yourself down when you accept retreat. Whereas if you collaborate and connect, what you inevitably find is that the story is so much bigger than you thought it was. That person's also gone through their own journey to get to where they are, and you can learn from their journey, or you can use them as an expander, and they will, if you're collaborating, they will actually help you and lift you up to, in some way. So and then you don't have to believe that you're less than, because befriending someone or collaborating with someone, you find that there's nothing ultimately that they have that you can't have, and they have the answers to what you have and what you want. So it's like, it's it's an accelerator, actually, collaboration. But I do think that there is an evolution that happens in order to get yourself to a stage where you feel safe to do that, where you feel safe to reach out to that person, network with that person, and I guess ask to be in their world, and I guess that evolution is something that we both had to arrive at. Like, we went through our own little baby steps to get there, and now it just all seems laughable. But I do think that it's another way to look at it. If you retreat and cut that person off, you're actually cutting yourself off from becoming who you want to be, from an opportunity. Yeah.
And this is something you talk about with your BPTs going through the exam, right? With your candidates.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And as you can all tell, I'm obsessed with the clinical exam candidates right now. I am in clinical exam season, so you're going to hear a lot about clinical exam. But one of the things with the clinical exam, and something I did with it, and I continue to see people do, now I want to shout this from the rooftops, is that when you're sitting your clinical exam, you think you're looking around you and you're comparing yourself to all your colleagues, right? Because you're at the bedside, you're in toots, and you're doing this kind of public humiliation failure thing, especially at the start, as you try and find your way with the clinical exam. It's so uncomfortable. But what you'll find is you'll see someone who's doing quite well, or someone that you regard as doing better than you in some way. And so you can have this thing where you're comparing yourself and you're feeling less than. And then that retreat thing happens where you're like, oh, I could never be them. And then you might start to avoid them because they're making you feel bad about themselves. This was exactly what I did. And what I try and teach people is that the clinical exam, as compared to the written exam, it's not a competition. So if you have passed your written exam and you show up for that exam on exam day, it's about you competing with yourself, right? If you get enough points, you will pass. It's not like anyone's going to take that away from you if you just get enough points on the day. So on exam day, you're actually not competing with anyone else. You're just trying to get enough points to pass, right? And when you're studying for your clinical exam, it doesn't feel that way at all. You think you're competing with everyone else around you and you're trying to put on a show and it's not working. And what I sort of suggest to people is to understand that it's not a competition right now as you study for it. And if you see someone doing something like that you think is great, then you have a choice to retreat or to walk towards that, be in their atmosphere. Ask them, can I record what you just said? Can I record you doing a long case so I can learn from can I learn from you? Can I be in your sphere? And try and see what they're doing that you want to do and understand that you absolutely can do it yourself. But if you see them as like them and you being so different, then you're probably not going to walk across that bridge. And people who are good at things naturally, they're probably going to be very, very open to sharing that with you. Absolutely. So I think that collaboration thing for the clinical exam, including sharing cases, not keeping cases from each other and doing those kind of toxic behaviors, all of that stuff. It's all rooted in what we're talking about today. But if you can see it not as a competition, but look around at your colleagues and think, who can I learn from today? what do they have that I would quite like to try out for myself, and understand that you can be like them. I think it can be an absolute superpower.
I have one of the surgical registrars I was working with has, as a client, has come to mind. And we did this exact work where she was putting her consultants on a pedestal, and all she wanted was to be like them. But because she'd put them on a pedestal, there was no method for her to interact with them and learn from them in a really productive way. They were these people who she could not question, she could not have productive conversations with, two-way feedback. She couldn't reveal her weaknesses to them, all these core ingredients that are required for learning. It's that idea that you're talking about, where when you make somebody as lovely as it is, like, what a compliment, how flattering is it to put somebody on a pedestal? It's wonderful in so many ways. And, holding this person with high regard. And you've also got to recognize when sometimes holding people in high regard is also not strategic for you, when actually it's tipped so far that you've kind of othered yourself, as you that brilliant word you like to use, othering yourself. You've made yourself different from them. You kind of cut off all lines of communication for you to become like them. It's sort of like that retreat response that you're talking about, I would say, as opposed to what would be more productive, which would be the competing or the collaborating response. And there are objections. I know I've worked with a couple of surgical registrars now in coaching and surgeons, and there is this sort of a different medical culture of respect, if you like, with some surgeons. Some surgeons will still find it quite insulting if you question them, or if you don't address them a certain way and things like that. I remember when I was an intern, I said, "Hi," first name, to a surgical consultant, and she just laughed at me. I was like, "Oh, what's funny about that?" "Ah, I see. Don't address me like that." So it does, like, it is obviously context dependent, but for this person, as a trainee, for her purposes, where she wanted to become more like these people, this compare and then retreat response that she was having was completely unproductive for the goal that she was setting. So as much as it can feel really good, and you can think that you're doing a lovely thing by putting somebody in a pedestal, just also recognize the separation effect that can have when you also have a goal of being more like this person who you admire so much that you want to put them on a pedestal. Don't make them some superhuman. I'm yet to come across an actual superhuman who is completely out of your league, and you cannot learn from yourself as a mere mortal and actually adapt towards their direction. I think that's really the intangible power of this collaboration step, this collaboration response that we're talking about. The power of being in somebody's space who you admire, just watching them, just interacting them, just, as you said, having them be one of the 5 most common people, or just a common influence around you. And suddenly the things that make them so wonderful, all those mysteries to you that you were previously putting up on a pedestal, the mysteries are revealed, and you start to see how they actually make that happen, and therefore how you can be more like that too. I think that's one of the biggest accelerators, being around people that you want to be like. I don't think you can read that stuff or work it out from a textbook. I think some things are just human influence and human relations.
I could not agree more. And I sort of have this image in my head of kind of pulling a chair up to the pedestal, because I feel like there's so much power in that. Like if you pull a chair up to the pedestal, even in that situation where you do have someone on a pedestal, which, like you say, it might not serve you, but if you can pull a chair up to the pedestal, even let that person know, listen, I actually really admire you. I would quite like to be a version of you someday. Can you give me any advice? Like, who on planet Earth is going to reject that conversation? I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, only good things can happen from that sort of pulling up a chair to the pedestal thing, I think. And then you'll probably see, like, you'll see a lot more of the what's real and what's true and what's underneath it all. Absolutely. And I just wanted to swing back to when you were talking about, well, we had this sort of idea that you arrive at comparison, you know you're in a comparison little trap, and you've got a choice how to respond. And we've talked a lot about retreating. But then competing can be both positive and negative. So you might use that person as an expander and be like, oh, it's on. I'm going to become you. And it can drive you, even if that person's completely unaware of it. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, collaboration would probably be better, and you'll arrive at the same place, but it's not a bad thing. But what I think is quite tricky in that situation, and I've seen this around, and it's just a behavior that can crop up, but part of competition might be trying to actually defeat the other person, put the other person down, mean girl the other person. And I guess I just wanted to touch on that for a second, just to bring it to top of mind, because this does happen. And I think a really common place that it happens, and really surprised, I don't know why it surprised me actually, but I'm very conscious of this as I get older. I want to make sure that I do not do this. But I think one of the places that this comes up real commonly is an older woman versus a younger woman in the same environment with the same job or the same surrounds. And I think that's a very easy place for, because there's a power dynamic as well, where the younger woman might get bad vibes from the older women, and that's happening because of lots of things, that comparison thing. But I feel like I would want to be the kind of person who would show up differently in that situation and appreciate that person and empower that younger woman. That's who I want to be as I get older. And I'm not saying that that's going to be easy, but I think that's just how I'd like to show up. But have you ever come across that scenario, or would you be able to speak to that?
Yes, and oh my goodness, I think women are the quintessential example, aren't they? They're the classic example. However, I've seen it in men many, many, many times, and I think it's, as you're saying, it's the power dynamic is a part of it too, isn't it? And kind of people up and coming for their jobs or for whatever their value is in their minds. I think I think it can very commonly happen with age, these age gaps, when you think about that, because you've got the young up and coming people who are kind of threatening people's like coming in as like the bigger, better, faster, like more recently educated, blah blah blah, whatever. And I have experienced that in my life where I've had people more senior to me. I only recognized after the fact because I was so young, purposely trying to tear me down. And you actually just made me think about how many women who are a decade or a couple of decades older than me in my life who are just these people who want to elevate me. Like they're such people who I don't feel like I really asked for in my life, but they're just the kind of person who sees someone, they've seen me, and they're just like, we want to accelerate you as much as possible. So that's amazing. However, I've been guilty of competing in a negative way. When I was young, I was a competitive swimmer, and I used to train in my squad. And in my squad were a couple of the people who were my biggest competitors in most of the races. And so every time I trained, I was such a competitive little thing. I was perfectionistic, and look, there was actually a lot to this. My value was completely tied up with my achievements. So competition was very important. Winning competitions was very important to me. And so every time I trained, and I was not afraid of hard work, I would train so hard. I would want to win at training. Like each time I trained, each time I trained, I would give it my all. And it would almost be like a race, or like me checking, where am I at? I feel like I would never run out of energy. It was crazy. But what I then realized was, when I got to the nationals, this whole idea of me wanting to be better than the people I trained with in my squad would only actually work for me if I got better, if I was better than them, while they were also getting better and better. It could not work by me being better because they were worse, because that doesn't help me when I get to the nationals. It just, then I'm the best in my squad, but when I get to the nationals, I can't compete. I can't keep up with the others. I actually needed my squad to be bigger, better, faster, stronger. I needed them to be the best, most amazing versions of themselves. I needed them to train as hard as I was motivated to train so that I could be pulled along by that momentum. So I could have that carrot in front of me. This is how we're training today. So that when we got to the nationals, we had any chance of competing with all these other people. So that was the first time. And I was actually quite young, but you know, there were those parts of my mind that was like, oh, I just wish they weren't as good. Wouldn't it be easier if they just weren't as good? Then I could win if they just weren't as good. But to realize that that wasn't actually a wish that I wanted to come true was so profound for that competitive little version of me. And that actually the only really way forwards that was a win-win was for them to get better and then for me to get better as well. So I hope that that's something that, I mean, it's the same with, again, coming back to that brilliant concept you have of, you know, surrounding yourself by the 5 people you want to be most like. If you are somebody who wants to be an excellent consultant, if you're somebody who wants to be that exam candidate that gets to walk into the exam feeling as confident as possible, you are more likely to be the best version of yourself if you surround yourself by other people who are excellent as well, right? So when you compete, be really careful to make sure you're not competing for the sake of winning like that young version of me was in competitive swimming, but instead you're competing with the idea, with the goal of you actually getting better and allowing everybody else to get better and you winning in that context too.
Oh my goodness, that is actually profound. Like I love that you learned that so young. It seems like a really evolved, you know, thing to learn at such a young age. And so it's beautiful and you can apply to so many scenarios. And I guess just on top of that, just even on a more sort of, you know, you get back what you what you give out type thing. I always think that when you reach this place, and it's not easy to do sometimes, just being really honest, but to wish on others what you want for yourself is one of the most powerful places to be. So for example, as a business owner, if I ever hear about anyone's business, I'm always like, oh, I really hope that does well. I really hope that does well because I want my own business to do well. And like with you, like, you know, you'd think that even where we are right now, that we could find a way to compete with each other. That is genuinely from the bottom of my heart, not a thing. Like, I just feel like if you're succeeding, I've got something to hold as like with your swimming thing. Like if you're doing well, great. Okay, an example of what's possible. That'll take my bar up as well, and vice versa. Like once you get into that zone where that is your lived experience and your true belief, it's such a beautiful energy to tap into because it's so expansive and everyone gets lifted up by it. You leave no one behind. Like, you know, you're looking around for who you can bring with you. Like it's that kind of energy. So it's truly beautiful. And I guess I just want to reiterate that is my lived experience right now in many facets of my life, but on no way am I saying that this is perfect. And I'm telling you quite honestly about how Becc and I started off. I was definitely not that person. And so I guess I just want to normalize that for anyone who's listening, just being aware of your comparison vibes coming up, just being really aware of it and doing what Beck's saying. You have a choice. You can compete, but you want to make sure that if you're doing that, do it in an arena where there's people. Be in the room where you're not the smartest person. You'll learn more. You'll be better. Okay, do that. Don't do it in a toxic way. You know, be happy for other people when they do well and strive to be like that. Try not to retreat if you can avoid it. Try to collaborate where you can as well. And if you approach comparison in this different way, I can just guarantee you that you'll have a better experience and you'll feel better as you move through your life.
That's such a beautiful wrap up. I want to write those like 5 steps down because they're amazing. And actually, I have an exercise for you guys, one that is a game changer for me, and I probably do once a year on average. So writing down a list of the people you admire and writing why. But here's the thing with comparison. You can also swap out the word admire for envy. The people you envy, the people you're jealous of, and write that list too. Because that list might reveal the exact same attributes and important missions and what you want as the list of the people that you just admire. Because we're all humans and we have these egos and we have these insecurities and we have these fears. So sometimes what we want, what we desire, is hidden behind those emotions that aren't as delightful. So try that. Who do I admire and why list? And as Kristeen's saying, with that list, just try and lap up how wonderful it is that they are succeeding in these particular ways that you're seeing them succeed. Just be so happy for them. Just think about how it's so wonderful for you that they're an example for you about what is possible for you too. If they can do it, then some of that is possible for you too. And you're attracted to that for a reason. And then also consider doing that list that might be a little bit more uncomfortable, but it achieves the same goal and it might achieve it even in an even more powerful way about who you might envy or be jealous of. And it's not about wanting to be that exact person. We're just picking out the particular things that you see in them that you like. It's not about you wanting to become just like them. It's never that. But it's like, what exactly? Just get down to the heart of it. What do you see in them that you like, that you want more of? And I think most importantly, as Kristeen was saying, be careful, be gentle with yourself as you're doing this, because you don't get to control the thoughts in your mind. You can easily slip into feeling, go into that retreat mode or feeling like you want to tear them down or make them less because you're feeling insecure or whatever comes up for you. And also realize that, as Kristeen said, you don't know the full story. You do not know all of what's going on in their lives as well. So be really gentle with yourself. Be very suspicious of the thoughts that come up associated with this comparison thing that we humans do.
Yeah, thank you so much, Becc. That sounds like a wonderful, I'm going to do that exercise. That's be super fun. I always want to do your exercises. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think it's just, I guess I just want to finish by saying I am so grateful that we both overcame our comparison blocks. I mean, yeah, thank you so much for being here, being in my life. I'm just so grateful to have you. And I hope that everyone listening has the same beautiful experience as they work towards overcoming comparison in their own lives. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And we'll see you again next week. Bye.
I've been waiting all my life for something. I've been down the darkest roads and up in the clouds, but I've always felt that something's missing. That was until I